Thank you so much for Ebenezer Manny Gallagher for inviting me to participate in and contribute to this scholarly personal narrative research inquiry project. I am Soko Starobin, and I am honored to share my reflections, perspectives, and recent musings from becoming an observer of what is happening in education in a broad spectrum. In this recording of my talk or narrative speech, I will share my personal background, how I became an education researcher in the field of higher education in particular, and how I position myself in a space of equity in education. This is something that I deeply care and pay attention to, anywhere from kindergarten all the way to adult education, as you can imagine, what we call as P220, educational spectrum. I become more of the observer nowadays and just wanted to share my perspectives and recent musings with you today. So I said earlier, my name is Soko Starobin. I see myself, I'm a humble education researcher and quiet activist. I say quiet activist who devotes to share a doorway, or I would say point of view to many of you and others to activate, validate, and implement designing, writing, presenting, and practicing that will create equity in education in the real world. What do I mean by sharing a doorway for others to design and create? I see you, education researcher, my fellow friends, and other practitioners in the field as a designers and creators. Lately, I've been contemplating and reflecting on the concepts of solidarity and sovereignty. One, solidarity represents togetherness or oneness, perhaps, and the other, sovereignty, represents independence. It seems they have the opposite meanings, as I thought and being taught this way of dichotomy for a long time. They are opposite, solidarity and sovereignty. When I think about myself, education researcher or quiet activist, what I do, how I think in a real world, then I had to think of the meanings of these two words or the concepts. Are they really opposite? I began to question myself, and really deep down, I questioned myself as how do I position myself in a space of equity in education? Where I fit in, where am I? What can I do? How I behave, think, reflect, share, and all that. Just wanted to share some of my thoughts around this concept of solidarity and sovereignty, how I see education. When I think of solidarity, it reminds me the notion of emotional solidarity. The notion of emotional solidarity is a framework originated in the work of Durkheim back in 1915, whereby the classical sociologist argued solidarity is forged through individuals possessing similar beliefs and behaviors as a result of interacting with each other. When I read this definition, when I see emotional solidarity with this lens, I reflect on what happened on the Black Lives Matter and Me Too movements. Individuals connected through similar experiences, beliefs, and behaviors as social media created the global connection and interaction. So I felt, well, there's something emotionally connected. There might be a solidarity around this. And then as we all know, I know, emotion can drive us, including myself, to certain behaviors. If I agree to this, if I share these beliefs, then I need to do X, Y, and Z. Or by doing so, it makes me feel good or righteous or justify myself of doing something good or right. I've been seeing enough love, awareness, and empowerment from those movements, Black Lives Matter and Me Too movements. I was the beneficiary of those. At the same time, I observed unexpected or unwelcomed consequences and behaviors that are fear-based. Giving too much empowerment, too much voice to those vulnerable populations created fear to other majorities. It also created defensive reactions and divisiveness. And I began to think why the solidarity is supposed to, or solidarity should bring people together. I thought I was reaching toward that, but unexpected consequences. There's that huge divisiveness that I observed. And when I think about why this happened, then I see the same dichotomy of thinking when we study, or I study and comprehend, present the notion of equity in education to the public, not within my friends who share the same value, behaviors, and experiences, but someone who don't share my experiences with me. Then it came to me that for those of us deeply care about the equity in education, there got to be something beyond emotion or emotional solidarity that bond us together. Perhaps through the scholarships we share, we create, but something beyond that, something beyond two-dimensional things. What I mean by two-dimension is paper and pencil, which is represented in the academy, is published articles or the books. But I always thought there got to be something beyond these two-dimensional things, going beyond the emotional solidarities. What is that bond us together? So I thought about that, and I thought about why am I doing this or choose to be educational researcher? Why do I care? Because of my occupation, job, how I defined in a society who I am, because of the title that I got. So in 2016, I left the academy. I don't write and present as much as I used to, but I still devote myself to create equity in education. The mode of delivery of my service or offerings have shifted. As I said, I no longer write for peer-reviewed journals or academic books. I no longer teach at a Research One institution. So this is a good time perhaps to bring it back a little bit for myself. As you have picked up, I'm passionate about looking at or observing or study equity in education, in particularly higher education context or field of higher education, in particular in the community college sector in higher education. I grew up in Japan, and I was raised until, I completed my college and I moved to the United States to pursue higher education. So I do have a lot of rooted cultural background in Japan. In fact, my first language is Japanese. I'm a mother. I'm also runner, musician. There are many things that I can identify myself. I studied higher education after completing my first college degree in Japan in engineering college. Let me say that I grew up in a rural town. I was raised 5 minutes away from Pacific Ocean in the main island of Japan, very small agricultural town. I had a choice after completing the local junior high school of going to the college-bound local high school or taking rigorous admission exam to go to engineering college, federally funded or nationally funded. I decided to jump into engineering college. At age 15, I left home. I lived in a residence-based engineering accelerated college at 15 for 5 years. Back then, there was very few female students in the college. My cohort, only 116 was selected, and I was one of 8 female that year. cohort before that was only 2 females among 160. So you can imagine I was in a fishbowl among the male students. The age range from 15 to 20. That was something else. It was a quite an experience for me. And then also my fellow female students at that time. But there is no transfer opportunities or stopping the higher education back then in Japan. Well, still that way. I had to finish or I would be a dropout. So I completed the 5-year program and I wanted to study a little bit more of the urban planning. And I decided to study 1 year in the US higher education university. So I came, I wanted to maximize my time studying and also interacting, getting the language and culture and everything else. So I was very involved in the student activities. I was fortunate to be hired as a resident assistant. That saved me in terms of room and board. And I was able to stay until my master's degree. And then I decided to go back to Japan and found that the reality of sexism and ageism in Japan, that I couldn't get a job with master's degree from the United States. Even a telephone interview or any of the potential employers will ask right away, how old are you? And it is a sexism that in their point of view, I was too old because they thought that as soon as I get married or as soon as I get child and I'm going to quit the jobs, thus they don't need late 20 or early 30, the age of the females. And then also I was way too educated compared to the other male counterparts. So I decided to come back to the United States and said, okay, I'm just going to pursue doctorate, go all the way. That's how I stayed in higher education. And I wanted to stay in academy. I want to go through the PhD program and so forth. And the ways in which I was able to show that something that I can offer or I can produce is that I had to overcome my imposter syndrome of using English as second language. So what is my strength? I decided to jump onto the quantitative research methodology. I was very comfortable with numbers, equations, writing programs. Those are the things that didn't really scare me at all. Coming from the engineering background, I decided to define myself as that. And as much as I pay attention to the community college education and equity in education, the mode of delivery of my scholarship was through the traditional quantitative research methodology. I chose to pick variables such as we all know from statistics class, that age, gender, GPA, ACT scores, and so forth. There is something numerically observed to give a value to do something or predicting some outcomes. And outcomes also defined by the numeric value, whether it's going to be retention, it's going to be your success ratio, it's going to be graduation rate, grades, always numeric. So that was how I was trained as an education researcher, and I made myself being comfortable doing that. And I was rewarded. I was seen as successful. My papers has been accepted to peer-reviewed journals, peer-reviewed conferences, and I was also fortunate to receive some external research grants because of that. Then something happened, and I will share with you later, that my decision to leave the academy came in 2016. And since then, the mode of delivery of my scholarship or my service or how I see myself now is the offering has shifted. So I no longer in research one or research intensive institution. I used to work at Iowa State University as a tenured faculty member. I'm at the quiet place in a space where I can reflect and contemplate. And yet, when I have an opportunity, I speak up, just as I'm honoring this right moment to share my personal narrative with you. As I'm speaking now, I feel emotional solidarity with my friends and colleagues. Now my head is recalling my life back in tenure faculty member and how I interacted with my students and my colleagues, fellow researchers who devote their scholarship and time and service to create equity in education at institutions in higher education. You might be working at a research university, community college, or pursuing a graduate degree in higher education. I'm in a different space, but I feel emotional solidarity with you, those who particularly devote the time to create equity in education. At the same time, I feel beyond our emotions now that I do have a space to reflect and observe my emotions. I have the capacity to do so. And we have, or you in particular, if you're working at an institution, we have professional responsibilities, maximize our skills and talent to create equity in education, whether it's going to be writing, presenting, speaking, producing something. And when we devote to something, then rewards such as promotion tenure or recognition by professional organizations, the rewards given by others externally do not matter. Well, at least for me now, those things doesn't matter to me anymore. I see our creativity, myself and you, your creativity and offerings matter more than pats on my back or how many publications, awards, and so forth. And I see that's beyond the emotion, that is devotion. When I remove the rewards or outcome from what I do, that's devotion. Those of you whom I have the honor to share my past professional life and current personal life, I'm feeling and receiving every day your devotion. I see through your work. I see through your success, recognition, and so forth. My friends, my fellow colleagues and researchers, I see your devotion beyond it. So I just want to share devotional solidarity with you. Because I removed my emotions from external expectations and systems of reward and punishment, as I was working in a research one institution, then the punishment is not an evident thing. But if you don't publish enough, then there will be punishment, which probably self-driven. But anyway, there is a system of reward and punishment. And when I removed that, my reflections and thoughts have been driven by my devotion, not the emotion, because emotion can be driven by those external things so easily. But when I remove that, my thoughts, actions, behaviors began to be driven by my devotion to create equity in education. And of course, I'm a human. I'm full of emotions still. My emotions actually drive me crazy every time, every day. I have fear, anxiety, imposter syndrome pile up on top of me all the time. When that happened to me, I dig up my potential to make an offering, even if it's a tiny small dust. My devotion to equity in education. I'm simply focusing on this moment we call now. So repeating the process of being in and out of state of being driven by my emotions, piling up and digging up my devotion. So I'm just simply repeating this process. Right now, I have a fear of communicating, speaking, narrating in English, which is second language to me. I fear that I still have an accent. What if I speak with wrong grammar? I still have a lot of fear of all those years living in the United States or living as a professional scholar or educator for so many years. I still have a lack of confidence around that. It piles up every day, but I know when to dig out the potential that I can create something. As long as I am aware of each moment, I'm scared right now, I'm afraid, I'm lacking my confidence right now, but here, let me dig out something that I'm comfortable with. As long as I'm aware of each moment, I'm okay. I'm okay. And now I just want to pause for a minute, think that I have to dig out my little confidence here. As I said earlier, I still have my fear, anxiety around this. So I just want to pause myself to put myself together. And to recall the concept of sovereignty, as I mentioned earlier, I used to think solidarity, the togetherness, the unity, and the sovereignty, independence as a different thing or the opposite things. For a long time, I neglected to recognize and give permission to have my own sovereignty at multiple levels. It's not just my physical self, right, sovereignty, but my cognitive, emotional, and spiritual sovereignty. One of my favorite spiritual teachers said we have three brains. One is the head brain and heart brain and gut brain. The head brain's cognitive. We process things and we rationalize, we analyze, and I spend a lot of time to nurture and protect my head brain, and perhaps gave too much of a sovereignty, independency of the head brain. My heart brain, more emotionally driven. When I became upset, sad, yes, all those anxiety, fear, imposter syndrome piled up. I just let that pile up and then crushed my physical sovereignty, physical self. I allowed myself to do that. I gave too much on my cognitive sovereignty. Spiritual sovereignty, I don't think I had any thoughts around that when I was in a system of punishment and rewards. Spiritual sovereignty, as defined as gut brain by one of my favorite spiritual teachers, gut brain, that's something so intuitive. And we all know what gut brain telling us, or telling me, at least for me. The sovereignty of that, I didn't recognize it. To protect myself from the emotional pileup and so forth, I used to do, and I still do, I'm pretty confident I am great at creating a physical space or physical sovereignty for myself. I'm a runner. I can go for a trail run for 2-3 hours just by myself, listen to the sound of nature and my footsteps. I don't need to carry iPhone to listen to music or distract me, anything. I am just as happy as just listen to my footsteps. But when it comes down to recognizing the sovereignty of my emotional and spiritual side, I had to have some event to wake me up. That event happened, actually. Came in 2015. I think I mentioned earlier, and to come back. So here I come back and share with you. So it took me a life event to awake my cognitive and emotional sovereignty or spiritual sovereignty. I share an episode with you really quick. In 2015, I thought I was doing well at work, professionally, physically. I was strong. I was training for half marathon or a marathon. I felt really good. I thought I was strong physically, but I was diagnosed with an early stage of breast cancer. That was a shock. I didn't know where that coming from. None of my family member had one. I was in a total shock. And one day, after the series of the treatments, the surgical treatments and everything else, I had to go through the radiation treatment for 3 weeks, every day. And one day, it was about to be my turn. The nurse told me that it's a slight delay. I had to wait for a few more minutes. And I saw 3 men with 2 boxes came out of the treatment room. And the nurse came along and then also told me and assured that no problem, we'll be ready for you soon. It's just that the machine failed this morning and those gentlemen came and fixed it and you are the first one up. So don't worry, everything will be fine. At that moment, I froze, said, oh, the machine wasn't working properly. And yes, I suppose it's fixed, but I'm the first one to go after that mechanical failure. The moment I thought about, well, what if the fixing is not properly working? I'm going to be all by myself with the metal room on the cold platform and receiving radiation. And it was an awakening moment. I never thought anything like this in my life. But I had to go in, I suppose. At that point, I thought I had to go in. So my name was called. I changed, really thin gown. I had to surrender myself. The moment I surrender myself, physically, emotionally, cognitively, all of that, nothing mattered. My title, institution, how many publications I had, how much research grants I had, none of it. Just me on the cold platform, waiting for the radiation to zip through my chest. That's the first time I felt immortality. Nothing mattered. Then, from that point, how I think and feel have shifted. Doesn't matter how I worry about the outcome or meeting somebody's expectations. None of that matters. I felt the sovereignty. I'm the one, I'm the only one. I was by myself in a metal room. I was the one. And I didn't have anything, just me. I see that as, that was me, that's complete me. Nothing to add, nothing less. Perfect as who I was. Nothing more, nothing less. Just as I exist right now. I don't have a particular title, any affiliations, or anything. This is my complete self. Thus, I see that as my sovereignty. That makes me alone or marginalized? I used to think that way. The more I add my layers of uniqueness or characters, I'm a Japanese, I studied engineering college, and so forth. I created a linear pyramid. First, I'm human. I'm the 50% of the human being, female, and educated at this level, and so forth and so forth. As I do that in a linear format, I felt more isolated or marginalized. That's the way I used to think. Now that I see myself, yes, I have all those layers of things that perhaps that only creates me, but I trust that I'm complete as who I am. And then if I create something that's very unique, and I'm gonna be a perfect creator of something. So if I'm gonna be a creator, very unique, distinctive creator of something to advance equity in education, and that's great. I respect, I honor my sovereignty. I'm not alone because I feel devotion of others, someone like you.